Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about period two, the time period from 1607 to 1754. And this is going to focus on how the British Empire is expanding. On this slide here, you can see all of the important dates that you guys need to know for that important dates that's later in April. So let's start with the first key story from this time period, and that is the development of the British colonies. We're going to focus on this period on the British colonies, unlike the French and the Spanish that Ms. Shack talked to you about in period one, because ultimately the British are going to prevail, as we'll see at the conclusion of this time period with the French and Indian War. So the British colonies are going to start to develop very, very differently in North America, in large part due to the geography and the climate. So we get the New England colonies. So that includes Massachusetts, but then also New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut. They're going to have rockier soils, harsher winters, and so people there are going to be focused primarily on subsistence farming, just making enough to survive. Many of the people who move to New England are going to settle there for religious freedom, including the Puritans, as they strive to create this model community, this model Christian community. They're also going to end up being quite religiously intolerant, exiling Roger Williams and Hutchinson, who will go on to form neighboring Rhode Island. And so, yeah, that's kind of the New England colonies. They're going to have a longer life expectancy, going to be more centered around families moving over there in numbers. And like I said, kind of a little bit more based on religion as to why they're founded. The middle colonies, like New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, they're going to be kind of a diverse group. They're going to be more known for the breadbasket colonies. So they'll have small farms growing corn, wheat, things like that. The colony we focused most on was Pennsylvania, or William Penn's Holy Experiment. Remember, that's going to be settled also actually for religious freedom for the Quakers as they were being persecuted in Europe. But he'll also have some unique things in his colony, like paying for Indians for land, not believing in fighting, equality for men and women, things like that. The Chesapeake or Southern colonies, Chesapeake refers to, remember, Maryland and Virginia, because they're on the Chesapeake Bay, but those are also a part of the Southern colonies, which also include the Carolinas and Georgia. With their warmer weather, they're going to be more reliant on farming, bigger farms. There'll still be a lot of small farms there, but there will also be some plantations consisting of larger acreage. But the main thing that they're going to be growing there is going to be tobacco. So when you think of the Southern colonies, remember Jamestown's founded in 1607, make sure you automatically think of tobacco. They'll also be growing like rice and indigo. Remember, the Virginia House of Burgesses is going to start in Jamestown. This is going to be the first representative assembly in the British colonies, but that will spread to all of the other colonies. Each colony will also have its own representative assembly, but the House of Burgesses is the example, the first one, and kind of the example we want you to know. But there's more disease in the Southern colonies due to the strenuous work, lower life expectancies. Schools that's more about homeschooling, unlike in New England, for instance. Remember, there's more tax supported schools. So just understand, make sure you know what the different regions of the colonies are. That's a classic question on AP. And make sure you know not only what the regions are, but how they are similar and different. The second thing we need to make sure we understand is how the labor systems of the British colonies are going to change over time. Many of the people that come to America are poor at this time, and so they end up signing an indenture or a contract to be an indentured servant, where they'll work for that person who paid for their passage for about 5 to 7 years in exchange for their freedom, and they hope that then they can go purchase land on their own. And so anywhere from a half to 2/3 of all the immigrants who are coming over here in the 1700s are coming over here as indentured servants. So it's a lot of people are coming over here as poor, white, young males that are going to strive to be farmers on their own. But over time, that pool of indentured servitude, remember, is going to dry up. And so slowly, the colonists will shift towards a race-based labor system, and that's what's known as chattel slavery. They switched to slaves, and eventually have to develop what slavery means, and eventually identify that to be a slave means that you're a slave for life. So slavery becomes ingrained with the Virginia slave laws, and you see each of the other colonies creating their own laws to articulate what it meant to be a slave, because this wasn't an automatic thing that once you're a slave for life. Someone had to pass a law to say that was the case. Or that what happens when you have children? Would they be the slaves too? That all had to be spelled out in laws. So over time, that becomes set in stone with these different laws in different colonies. Remember, slaves, the first slaves arrived in 1619, and then it eventually will replace indentured servants by the 1800s. But slavery at this time in colonial America was all over the colonies. There were far more of them in the South than in New England, but there were also slaves in New England, perhaps doing more like domestic work, caretaking, things like that. There are going to be some rebellions against these labor systems, like the Bacon's Rebellion, remember, was not a slave rebellion, but that was a group of poor farmers that rebelled against the planter class in Virginia, the wealthier class. And the Stono Rebellion, of course, is going to be the most famous, the biggest colonial slave rebellion that took place in South Carolina. So make sure you understand how there was a lot of indentured servants, like white farmers, poor white farmers that were the main labor source in the colonies. And over time, that slowly shifts to being Black, African slaves, and laws that are made to kind of define what it meant to be a slave. And unfortunately, that's what's going to stick around until the Civil War, of course. The last story we need to know about is just how do these colonies even come about? Like, why are they allowed to exist in the first place? Why are people allowed to move from Great Britain? And the reason is because of mercantilism. Remember, mercantilism is just an economic policy that's designed to benefit the mother country. And it's going to involve trading restrictions on the colonies. So the colonists are going to be allowed to come here because then they are going to ship back certain products, certain crops and resources to Great Britain, and then Great Britain can make them into finished products. And so that's kind of what is all part of this triangular trade route that develops during this time. In order to make sure that the trading restrictions are, enforced or clarified, I should say, this policy is enacted. They create the Navigation Acts in the 1660s. Britain creates these trading restrictions on the colonies, saying only certain things can be traded with Great Britain and so forth. Those Navigation Acts, remember, are in large part unenforced. In the 1660s, colonists respond by smuggling, kind of stealing things, or trading things with other countries or getting things from other countries that they're not supposed to. And during this period 2, 1607, up until 1754, there's a period of salutary neglect. Remember, that's just a fancy way of saying that the king was kind of neglecting the colonies. That is all going to change in period 3, as we'll hear about in the next video. But so trading and trade restrictions, right, was a big thing during this time. And so the South was big into trading and growing tobacco. The North was kind of more, because of their terrain, their geography, was more into building ships. Because remember, this is how people would get around, and that was a big industry at the time. So trade was a really big thing at this period as well. All right, hope that helps, guys.